This is Jamie Dyer welcoming you to another edition of the Quo-Cast. And I'm joined today by Mick Hughes from Quo Connection, formerly JCQ. Welcome to the podcast, Mick. Tell me, how did you get into Status Quo?
How did I get into Status Quo? Well, do you know what? It was a long time ago, but I've got very clear, very vivid memories of the kind of sequence of events. It kind of goes back to almost like in the 1960s, where it was my parents' record collection that kind of formulated what would later become my musical tastes, I suppose. And it was I lived in a house that was always playing Johnny Cash, The Seekers, Herman's Hermits, all those great '60s artists, my mum and dad. So I probably found my discovered Quo similar to a lot of other people of my era, which was the sort of early '70s when I became aware of them, and that was going to the youth club. I used to go to these youth club discos, and when you were 11, I think I was coming into my last sort of term at primary school, started going to the youth club, and this was sort of 1973, summer of 1973. So I was hearing all these sounds. I mean, they was always playing all this music, and it was all the chart music of that time. And of course, glam rock was really in. I was hearing a lot of stuff, and it was like, oh wow, this is interesting. It was bands like Mud, Sweet, Slade. In fact, I've brought some props because suddenly to help jog my memory. As that sort of progressed, when I got into 1974, suddenly the short back and sides haircut that I joined secondary school by sort of September '73, and of course, when you just joined secondary school, pop music becomes more important, or it certainly did for me. And so I suddenly started getting a record collection, and it was predominantly singles to start with, because that's all you can afford with your pocket money. So at the youth club, you would hear all these songs. I heard sort of like Caroline and Paper Plane and stuff, but it was all mixed in with all these other things. But I'll tell you what was interesting about that period of music is that everything had a shuffle. All that music was all like 12-bar music. If you listen back to Mud, Susie Quattro, a lot of the Sweet stuff, they all go do 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 do. There's a definite mid-tempo shuffle thing going on throughout all the Susie Quattro stuff. The can and all of those. So this was my music at that point. As I got into 1974, then I was like getting like we used to get what was called record tokens. And my dad's sisters, my aunties, they were great because every birthday, every Christmas, they would bestow upon me these record tokens. And I would get stuff like this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, your Mud, your Sweet, all the glam
These
stuff.
are the original albums, by the way.
Yeah.
Still got them. So that was kind of this shuffle thing. But anyway, when I went into the second year in '74, I went to a boarding school for army kids, and this was in Germany. In the dormitory, one of my dorm mates, he had an elder brother who was like the year above, and generally you tended to avoid the lads that were older. But we used to be able to go into his dormitory and his elder brother. and they were always playing music. Anyway, they everything was on cassette as well. We had these little mono cassette players. Anyway, there was this band blaring out, which caught my ear. I thought, what the heck is that? And it was Tom. He said Status Quo. Oh yeah, Status Quo. And it was this album. It was their latest album, and it was. I've got it right here. It was this.
Quo from 1974.
It was like, wow, this is immense. Because up to that point, yeah, I'd heard the singles, but that was the turning point. That was when Mud and T-Rex and everybody suddenly, they were getting a bit of a backseat, if I'm being honest. Because guess what? The next record token that I got, it was straight down to the NAFI to get the Quo album. That was really where that was the turning point for me, where I was just blown away. I used to play it at every opportunity, which was a thing. The new Quo album would come out. I mean, thereafter that point, I mean, I it was then, oh, wow, what else is there? Oh, there's this Black album. Oh, it's got Caroline on it. Great. And there's, oh, wow, there's all this other stuff. Then the Pile Driver album, of course. So it was like suddenly, and that was it. It was, there was no turning back from that point. And that was kind of how it all began, really.
I mean, there are a lot of people out there that will relate to that, because I'm sure many people would have got in from Quo album onwards. That one in particular, when taken into account everything else, is probably their heaviest effort, isn't it?
Yes, it is their heaviest effort. I mean, we could do a podcast on that album alone. It's like there's so much going on. People always say it's their heaviest album, but I would also say it's their most progressive. It's a very progressive album because there are so many dynamics going on within it. Whether I mean, one second you've got Drifting Away, which is a straight ahead, fast rocker. And then you've got something like Lonely Man, which, wouldn't look out of place on like a Led Zeppelin album or something, all these different contours and facets to what the band could do, which a lot of people never really, they always, I've heard it, people from say, oh, it's all the same, it's just one dimension, but it isn't. If you explore most of the albums, you will find the different textures and colours of Quo. Definitely.
And that seems like a really good point to kind of go on to. Obviously, many fans believe that after the live album, they were never quite the same again. What are your thoughts on that thinking?
Well, that is very true. From going through the experience, okay. So, like I say, when I got the Quo album, which was the current latest album at that time, as I say, it was then a case of investigating, whatever the back catalogue was, to that point. And then I was because I was suddenly an obsessed teenage fan, it was like, the next album, what's the next album going to be? And of course, the next album was On the Level. But by this point, I'm as much of a fan to be anticipating its release. So you get on the level. I mean, again, what an album. I mean, the album itself plays like a gig in a way. I always used to think of it in those terms. It's got a very strong opening number, and it goes, you know, shuffle, slow a bit, you know, but all the dynamics, and of course it had Down Down on it, the huge single, and then it ended with Bye Bye Johnny. So it played kind of like a gig in a way, but of course, again, that got played and played and played and played endlessly. You would put it on the record deck, end of side one, flip it over, and this would go on. And the parents would be banging on the ceiling, turn that racket down. All the great stuff that is part of the teenage experience. And then, of course, Blue for You. And I remember coming home from school half term. Mum had got me. She got it on the day of release from the NAFI, and put it on. I mean, we'd had Rain. We knew the single that had been out. And it was like from the first few bars, it was like they've done it again. They've blown me away. Monstrous album. So then what? Well, then it was announced. Then it was announced in the music press that they were going to be recording a live album. So we knew of this. Fans were aware of this in sort of '76, and they were doing these specific 3 dates at Glasgow Apollo, and so then, I mean, think about it. It's like, a live album. You know, what could be better? I mean, this is Quo's natural habitat. This is what they're really all about. Is the live environment. So the live album eventually emerged, and at the beginning of 1977, and of course, that was just, again, constantly on the turntable. The air guitar was tuned up every day. It was fantastic, and you could imagine you would you'd get a Hoover attachment or something. You would be there playing the Glasgow Apollo as you've got this blasting out while your parents have gone out. So we'd had this run of all this stuff, this fabulous music, and then there was like a hiatus, I suppose you could call it. I seem to remember in '77, and they'd gone to Sweden to record, because there was all these little snippets you would get in the music press of what was going on. I mean, you didn't have social media, so you relied totally upon what you would read up in a magazine or something. So, and of course, the great thing about that was that bands could trickle information to the public. So there was always that fantastic thing where you didn't know what was coming up ahead. And that was the wonderful thing about not having social media. Because we'll get to this, because you've asked me what was my feelings about this change, because this is actually all relevant. I'd seen the band by this point, so then they'd gone to Sweden and to record what was to become the Rock All Over the World album. So that came out, the single. So it was on Top of the Pops, and yes, everybody knows about the dummy thing now, but I was one of those that spotted it immediately. Something was weird. it was, but it was, we were just so glad to see them on top of the pops again. So Rock All Over the World, I wasn't hugely taken with it. Bearing in mind that the previous single to that was Mystery Song, which of course, I don't think there's anybody who's a Quo fan who dislikes Mystery Song, is there? I don't know.
No, I don't think so.
I don't think there is such a thing, is there? And so, but Wildside of Life, I'm sorry, yeah, Wildside of Life, I forgot about what. We always forget about Wildside of Life, don't we? Or is that because we're trying to forget about it? I don't know. I didn't actually mind it. Okay. Sorry, yeah, I was a bit wrong there. I was thinking about Mystery Song. But anyway, that was fine. I loved it for the B-side, actually, Wildside of Life. I thought, now my brain's working. The B-side of Wildside of Life was a track called All Through the Night. And again, this is relevant because although Wildside of Life was, again, didn't set the world on fire in terms of the way the Mystery Song did, but it was the B-side. I kept playing the B-side, which I thought was, again, it was very progressive. And it was another Rossi, it was another Francis Allen composition, which they'd not really been working together as such, it appeared, although I do believe up to a particular point they actually all did work on the material equally. But in terms of writing credits and stuff, they'd done, the songs on Blue for You, which everybody loved. And then here was another one, which was, again, was progressive and interesting. And the producer was Roger Glover. So that was looking interesting for whatever the next studio album was going to be. For me at that time, I was quite excited about it. So I remember it very well, Rock All Over the World, the album. I'd come in from school. My mum, again, she'd been down to the shops. She actually picked it up for me from the local record store the day that it was released. So I got in, I had my dinner, and I dashed over to my friend George Goff, who was another obsessed Quo fan, and a couple of other guys as well. And I hadn't played it. I didn't play it. I resisted playing it. But the deal was I got it first, and we were all going to sit and listen to it together. So we put it on George's record deck when I went over there, and we all sat round the table. And there was this kind of uneasy silence, is all I can say. We listened to it in its entirety, and none of us really knew what to sort of say. It was the weirdest thing, because the anticipation and expectation was so high that it really was one of those strange moments where you really are flummoxed. And then there was this kind of, oh, well, I liked this. Oh, Rockers Rolling, that was good, wasn't it? And it was almost like you're trying to talk yourself into finding something great about it. It was just not hitting the spot. And that is my honest opinion. And I remember we had tickets for the tour. The tour was fantastic. It was, again, what they'd done was, I remember it at what was it? It was Hammersmith and Lewisham Odeon I went to. And of course, there was the whole Junior's Wailing thing. Junior's Wailing had been the opening song for years. And I remember the house lights going down, and what they call the safety curtain was down. They always lowered the safety curtain before a lot of the bands used to come on. Anyway, there was a projection. This projection went onto the big safety curtain, and it was the world turning, and it said London presents Status Quo. Anyway, as this goes on, the curtain goes up, and there's the drones going on, this drone thing. I mean, we wondered what the hell was going on, all right? And again, this goes back to my thing about the whole social media, the cat being out of the bag. You know, people are so eager to get onto their Facebook and announce whatever a set list is or something, and it's sort of, it's a spoiler. Facebook is full of spoilers. Well, we didn't have that back then, because hardly anybody had a telephone. Mates that you had on Quo fans, there was a lot of friends that you had that you would only see on the tours. You'd meet up outside Hammersmith Odeon or whatever, and then you wouldn't see them again until whenever the next tour was. But anyway, get back to the gig. There's this, and I mean, it was a really aggressive noise. The place is going bonkers. And the curtain goes up, there's smoke everywhere, the spot goes on to them as Rick's doing the intro to Caroline. We were like, what? It was, I cannot tell you the excitement and surprise and all those wonderful things where you were expecting one thing and you got something else which was even better. It was bedlam.
I mean, that is like they recorded the album and then they said, well, we've got to make the show slightly different so that people aren't just hearing the album when we play.
Yeah. And they'd kind of revamped. I mean, the whole look. The old backline had gone. Suddenly, there's this Vox backline, all very uniform and stuff. There's flipping Andy Bown on the stage as well. That was a shocker. Who's that? And because at that time, of course, he was guesting. He was guesting on keyboards, as they say. But that's all right. That's fine. But it was immense. So the thing was, all right, the album, Rock All Over the World, the album was a bit of a letdown, or not what we expected, let's say. Because obviously with mature ears, I listen to stuff now. And of course, I myself have been playing for so long. You tend to listen to things differently as you mature anyway. And I can see reasons for things and stuff. And but as an obsessed teenage fan at the time who just wants Blue for You Part 2, it was really a letdown. And I do remember also a friend of mine, he said, well, what's that new Quo album like then? I said, I don't know what they've done. And he said, well, forget about that. Have a listen to this. And it was Let There Be Rock by AC/DC. I think that was their album that year as well. And there was just no comparison. It was like, wow, the energy and rawness of it. I was getting the buzz out of that I got when I listened to Blue for You or whatever. So, but on top of all of that as well, I mean, there was the whole punk thing going on. I mean, another album that was not far from my turntable was the Sex Pistols album. I mean, that just blew everything out of the water, quite honestly. I mean, without Johnny's sort of sneering vocals, it is actually a rock album. It's just Johnny's lyrics and his attitude and everything that kind of really makes it, what it is. But so Rockin' Over the World, the album really didn't get played as often as it should have done, which was a shame. But this is it. Band gets to a point. I mean, we'd watched them get to. I mean, '77 was kind of like a turning point for the band because they'd been on the ascendancy at that point. And then there was the sort of milestones like winning the Daily Mirror Rock and Pop Awards. They were voted Hard Rock Band of the Year. So there was all the fuss about that. It was like they'd climbed the ladder. They were up there now. And so like I say, with mature ears and having a bit of a better insight into things, and it was obviously every band wants to break America. I don't care what people say. Every band that's done the US, broken the US market, they've never had to look back. And it's like, and Quo tried, it just didn't happen for them. But again, the Rockin' Over the World, Pip Williams, they chose Pip Williams as the producer. Now, getting back to the B side of Wildside of Life, they had Roger Glover. Now, I don't know what happened there. Things didn't work out for whatever reason. But I would have liked to have seen how things would have progressed had Roger produced the next studio album. Because from what I heard, that one track, it was looking very interesting to me. But they picked Pip Williams, and if the idea was to break the States, I've said this to other people, and this has been come up in discussion. What I couldn't understand was, and this is no disrespect to Pip Williams because he's a respected record producer and he does know his stuff. But for me, surely if you want to break the American market, you would pick someone with a proven track record of producing successful albums in America, just as people at one point were queuing up to get Mutt Lange to fiddle with the knobs. Certainly worked for AC/DC. So I don't know. Just a thought. Just my thoughts.
Well, thank you for giving us your thoughts on that particular subject. Now, the thing that people will know most about you, I'm sure, is that you've played in many bands: Predator, JCQ, obviously now Quo Connection, which was born out of that. What was it like, to sum up? What was it like playing with John Coghlan?
Well, it's weird, isn't it? Going back to Quo Live, because obviously there was a point where it wasn't enough to be playing air guitar or getting my mum's Hoover attachment or the nearest badminton racket or whatever was available. I wanted to play the guitar, and that's kind of started around about the mid-70s. Yeah. So Quo Live, you used to put Quo Live on. I'm pretty sure I'm not the only one who did this. You'd put Quo Live on, and you'd imagine you were one of the band. You were there at the Glasgow Apollo. Like I say, you'd wait till mum and dad had gone out, open up the radiogram, put it on, play it from start to finish, leaping around the lounge like a lunatic, imagining, So it's funny how things turn out, isn't it? So yeah, as time went by, I sort of learned how to play the guitar sufficiently enough to be able to go out and perform in front of people. I hadn't been in that many bands actually, but there was the Quotations, which was like my team band. Again, just playing Quo. That would have been around about 77, 78. Then there was a few sort of other little dabblings. But then I joined Predator in the early 80s. So it was funny because there was a time where I sort of seemed to be less the teenage obsessed fan. Suddenly I was out there doing my own thing. You start gigging, you start playing in bands, you're sort of less, you know, that sort of teenage thing. You start going out there playing music yourself. So anyway, if anybody had said to me as I'm leaping round the room, front room to Quo Live, do you know what, Mick? One day, you'll be playing this stuff with John Coghlan playing drums. What are you going to say? I mean, it's like no, that's ridiculous. Well, and Alan as well. Of course, there was I did actually one of those conventions. Yeah, we had Alan. We did a couple of songs with Alan as well. So I had Alan and John. It was weird, but it didn't freak me out. But what I always I never sort of lost sight of. There's so many guys out there, probably who would love to do the same thing. So I always think to myself, I always say all those people who want to play Quo or have ever wanted to play Quo with a member of Quo or whatever it is. Do you know what? I say I'm doing it for you as well because I'm pretty sure you were just like me. I don't know if that sounds a bit strange, but it's like at the end of the day, I'm still kind of that teenage obsessed Quo fan somewhere in the dark mists of time. How it came about, it was a mutual friend. So none of this was sort of engineered. It was a mutual friend who introduced us to John, and things just came about really. So it wasn't like I was stalking him or something. Please, John, please let me play guitar for you. It wasn't like that at all. It was all very sort of casual. And that first time I jammed with him, I remember we did In My Chair, and it was immediate. It was like you played Quo with various other drummers and people that you knew, friends and so, but suddenly it all made sense. The way that John plays, it was like this is it. This is how it should be done. What John is playing exactly on the drums, what is required. It was just fantastic, and I don't know how many gigs we've done over the years, but got to know John as a friend eventually, and it's like don't even really think about it now, but yeah, it was fantastic, and we've had a lot of fun over the years.
Let me move on to some questions that some people have put to us. Now, some of them were funny. I'll ask a couple of those. In fact, let me ask you what your favourite pot noodle is. I saw that and I thought I need to ask you because you must have had some kind of convenience food on the road over the years.
Yeah, funnily enough, the pot noodle is not my thing. It's not really me. That's Russ more than anybody else. He's the pot noodle man. But I do eat them if there really is nothing else available. I will I will indulge, but I don't think there's actually really a favourite one as such. I think they're all equally disgusting.
Well, let's with that thought, let's move on to the Quo questions. When it comes to Quo Connection, obviously, you guys used to be JCQ when John was with you, and when it was JCQ, you released a couple of singles. Was one single, Lockdown / No Return. Are you planning to, sorry to use the pun, return to that or not?
Well, there's no shortage of material, and really, that whole lockdown thing. It was only really, it was during the pandemic when nobody could go out, and the way that it came about was obviously bands. Anybody who was playing in a band and people who like to go and see bands, and suddenly this privilege has been taken away from everybody. So it was like, well, you've got all this time on your hands, and it's very, very miserable for everybody. So we were just to keep our minds on something and keep maybe putting something out that might entertain people. It's sort of, and initially the idea was that we were going to just, I think that there was a thing put up on John's Facebook page, and it was, we wanted people, because like people they do all these selfies and all this sort of stuff, and we put this thing up saying, send in all your selfies from when you've been to gigs, and we'll do like a montage to music, and we'll put, we were going to put that up so that everybody can be on this bit of music, whatever it might be, and see themselves, and just sort of try and cheer people up a little bit. Anyway, that developed into Pete. Pete did the music, and right, I've got this. This was the music that was supposed to go with the photos, but then it sort of developed into lyrics. Oh, let's make it into a song. So then, it was Rick. Rick wrote the lyrics to Lockdown. He came up with the idea for calling it Lockdown. And anyway, of course, we're all communicating by emailing and stuff at this point. He sends this thing through, Lockdown, and me and Pete, we both had the same reaction. It was like, no, not some dreadful song, some dreadful lockdown song, because it's like, I don't know. I mean, this probably sounds terrible, but you're just thinking, oh, somebody's going to release a song or something to do with whatever it is, and it be awful. Anyway, Rick had done a little demo of it, and we were like knocked out with it. It was like, no, this is good. This has got something. Then we made that crazy video. Once we'd emailed each other, this was the other thing, the way we'd emailed each other all the different parts for the song and everything. Digital technology is wonderful for that, all of that. So we'd managed to put this thing together, and then it was like, I don't know, it might have been me. I said, we need to put a video to it. We need to do something. And then that crazy video was created. But that's another story in itself. But anyway, then it got to releasing it. But we really only did it to just cheer people up. And we were absolutely knocked out with the response and reaction that it got. we were really genuinely taken by surprise at the wonderful messages that people. I mean, people were saying that I was really, fed up, and this really cheered me up. And we got that a lot. That seemed to be the predominant reaction, and we were quite humbled by the whole thing, that it got such a reaction, and really did do exactly, in actual fact, what we intended it for, was to give people something to smile about. Then it got into people wanted it. So there was a demand there. So then that was how the single came. And then it was like, well, we can't just put one song out. We need to. And I had this other song kicking around, which had been kicking around for ages, actually. But it needed development. So me and Pete, we developed it, which was No Return. So it was supposed to be sort of like a double A side, or whatever they call it now. So we did. We got Jason at Barrel and Squidger. He was up for it. He got it sorted out. He got it produced and pressed up and everything. And then it had an official release, and it charted in the physical chart at number 2. Peaked at number 2. Went in at number 2. Yeah, we were just dashed at that number 1 spot. That's another little story. But so we were really blown away by the whole thing, and then of course there was the inevitable thing. This is something that's been going on, about people want an album, and we have got material, but again, it's that thing: is there enough of a demand? Because even if you speak to Francis about all this stuff, even he, the general thing is that there seems to be, like, even getting a new Status Quo album is not a guaranteed thing. It's not. That seems to be that people will reluctantly release albums now, unless it's like a compilation of best of or greatest hits. A new album of material is generally, it's weird. It's kind of become, well, is anybody interested? And yeah, there does appear to be an interest there, but it's that thing of, well, you got to make the thing, and that's an investment in itself. So it's you don't make any money out of it anymore. I mean, yeah, okay, lockdown charted and all that and everything, but hey, I didn't end up ordering my yacht to pitch up in Saint Tropez. It's, but that's not the reason why I do it. But yeah, but even if you, like I say, if you spoke to Francis Rossi, which he has done, he's talked about these things as well, about new product and things. That's not to say that it won't happen, but I don't know. I mean, we've done gigs where we did lockdown and No Return, and at some gigs you'd get this amazing reaction, and at other gigs it was like, what the hell's this? Nobody knew what it was. So it was like, even within the kind of Quo fan base, there was still people who were unaware of it.
Because it isn't unheard of that a Quo tribute band does Quo-like material that didn't originate with Quo, because, there's yourselves, obviously Dog of Two Head, and a couple of others around Europe that have done this. So it isn't like, the fan base isn't used to a band doing that.
Yeah, it is. Well, yes, actually, you talk about that. There was a couple of Predator albums I remember. I remember when that first one came out. Mean. I mean, it was like people went bonkers for it.
It's a great album.
And oh, thanks. But it was like again, it was that thing of wow. It sort of catches you out, and people went bonkers for it, and so there. I guess there is a kind of a demand for it there, and but is there enough of a demand? And we did sell a lot of them, and we were sort of like flavour of the month for a while, probably. I think even Francis ended up having a copy of it. I seem to remember somebody who gave it to him. So it stuck in my mind. It was something along the lines of, "Here, you want to have a listen to this? This guy sounds like you." And Francis said something along the lines of, "Yeah," he said, "it could be me," which is a great compliment. But I always think that all of us who are like scratching around writing all these songs in a Quo style, they're all. I always think about them as like that. They're kind of like the songs that Francis probably dismissed. Because what's always amazed me, I know Francis or Quo themselves get a lot of criticism with their output. Everybody seems to, I wouldn't say everybody, but there is this kind of underlying thing of, oh, I wish they would do another album like On the Level or something, you know? Surely, yeah. And but of course you can't, because you need the chemistry of the four people who made that music, really, to get that. But what's always amazed me about Francis is that all the different, again, all the different colours and versions of Quo and everything, Francis has consistently, he finds these melodies. You end up thinking, how did he come up with that? He finds all these melodies and everything. It's like, I know he's back to working with Bob and has been for a number of years again, which has been great because those two together, in terms of songwriting, you know, it's very the quality and the consistency of it is, you know, beyond doubt. But you still have to come up with the music and the melodies and everything. And it always still amazes me that Francis can find all these melodies. Because when you try and write in that style, you end up going, oh no, I can't. You can't do that. That sounds like that. That's exactly that. You know. So you're in this very limited to try and come up with something and sort of writing in the style of somebody else. Somebody else's writing style is a challenge, and so you get varying degrees of success of whether you get anywhere close to it or whatever. But there you go.
So how are you getting on with Quo Connection? How are things going?
Yeah, it's we've had a fantastic reaction so far. Of course, when we were sort of as JCQ was sort of winding up, I'd reached a point where I was like, oh, I need a break from all of this. I've been doing this for so long. I was kind of, if I'm being honest, I was kind of burnt out. And but then there was this period. I did have a break, and then the guys, they wanted to sort of just get together and have some jam sessions and things. But also that it sort of became the topic that people would speak to me about, or they'd message me. I had all these messages. You know, I really hope you're going to continue and do something. You know, and I was sort of unconvinced because I did have a chat with, I think, one of the guys from one of the other bands. They said, "Well, what are you going to do?" You know, I said, "Well, I don't know. People are going on about this, but I said, does the world really need another Quo band? I mean, there's so many Quo bands out there. Does the world really need another one? I don't know. I'm not sure, but so we had a few jam sessions and stuff on that, and it was like, yeah, no, this is sounding pretty good actually. And we put some videos up of us trying things out in the rehearsal room, and people really were enjoying it. There was a really nice reaction to it, some lovely messages and things. So I thought, all right, yeah, no, let's do this then, because it sounds good. So yeah, we went out. We started back at the beginning of the year, started gigging, and we've had some incredible reactions. All the gigs have been really good fun. Um, People are really up for it. So yeah, let's see where it takes us. I mean, we're sort of. I don't know if you've seen. Have you seen the band at all?
I haven't. Well, I've seen video. I haven't seen you live.
You
No.
haven't actually come to a gig, yeah. The gig is a different kind of approach to what you would expect. We've kind of tried to think a little bit outside the box in the terms of the way that we do the show. And although it is actually a 70s sort of vibe, because that's appropriate to where we are at, especially me. But the guys in the band, that's our era, so that's appropriate to. And plus, also, we don't have a keyboard player, so we're sort of limited to doing the more sort of guitar-based period with less reliance on the keyboards. So we've kind of stuck to that, but we've sort of mixed it up a little bit. We don't run the show as you would expect. In fact, I remember Yvonne Hanvey her and Paul came to the Brook in Southampton because they live in Southampton. And we had a little chat after the gig, and she said to me, she said what she really loved about it, she didn't really know what was coming next, which other people that I've spoken to, they found that refreshing. You genuinely don't know. It's like it's not a predictable set list of how the whole thing runs anyway. It starts in our own sense of humour kind of way, I suppose, the show, and on it goes, and we kind of present it. We just, in a different way. I think there's a slightly different approach, but the music remains faithful. And of course, that's what really matters at the end of the day. And the guys are great. It's all great fun, and yeah, apart from the pot noodles, but.
Well, we'll draw this to a close, but before I let you go, I used to do this feature. I haven't done it for a year. I think the last person I did it with on here was Stephen from Quode. And basically, on the podcast, we like to celebrate Quo albums that are celebrating a milestone this year. So, 10, 15, 20, up to 55, I guess, this year. And I just want you to give me short answers as to kind of your opinion of the particular albums I'm about to name for you. So this year is 55 years since the release of Picturesque, etc. What do you make of that album?
Well, funnily enough, it was all that 60s stuff when I was initially a Quo fan, a teenage Quo fan. It was kind of almost like I was horrified by it. When I did eventually sort of start going that far back into the back catalogue, it was didn't really get played very often. In fact, I remember there was one of the no, I won't go into that. There was one of those Golden Hour albums which tricked a lot of people, I think, because on the cover He had Quo at like the Reading Festival. The hair, it was like almost like a slight nod to the Pile Driver album cover. So I remember getting it and go, oh, wow, this is going to be great. Well, boy, was I in for a shock. But of course, that was all the 60s psychedelia, the John Schroeder stuff from that. And but as I've matured, you'll probably more often find me than not playing that era, because it's actually, a lot of it is very underrated. The musicality of Alan's bass playing in particular, if you actually listen to what Alan is doing, he's the most musical out of all of them. And you listen to his bass lines on all of that 60s stuff, and you will be amazed what's going on there.
I think people will be listening a little bit closer, because I think a lot of fans do kind of steer clear of that stuff. But, Barry's Spare Parts kind of did a good job at the convention, I thought, of bringing some of that into play. So, yeah, I'm going to ask you about 3 albums. That was the first one. I asked Baz Barry recently, actually, to mention him, about If You Can't Stand the Heat.
Right.
And basically, I cut out a lot of our conversation because he kept kind of going off on these deviations. And a lot of time,
I know him very well.
And a lot of time, he'd say to me, Mick could probably tell you about that in more detail than I can. Sorry to put you on the spot here, but
Okay.
what do you make of that album?
What do I make of it? All right, I'll try and give as short a reaction as I can. Hopes were high after Rock All Over the World. Particularly, I seem to remember there was a couple of interviews. There was certainly one interview with Rick, and he was raving about the next release and likening it to Pile Driver. And I've probably still got the review. I know I have, because I'm a terrible hoarder in amongst all my old Quo memorabilia. And the interviews up there, so I'm reading this stuff. Oh, relief! And there was almost like I think there was like some kind of reference to, we've seen the error of our ways. We didn't quite get it right with that last album, but we've addressed it, sort of thing, you know. So hopes were high, right? Well, put it on the flipping radiogram. I remember in my mum and dad's sitting room, and my mum was in the kitchen doing the dinner. And again, I felt was better than Rock. I was enjoying it better than Rock All Over the World, because it had that. I don't know. It was more. Again, it was an original composition from within the band, and it had, you know, I didn't mind it at all. So hopes were high. Again, I really didn't know what was going on. There was trumpets. There was everything you would not expect on a Status Quo album was there for us all to hear. And really, again, in a year when the other albums were being released, like Live and Dangerous, AC/DC, Power Age, all these other great what was the UFO one that came out that year? Obsession, wasn't it? I mean, all these other hard rock albums, which were fantastic. And Quo bring out If You Can't Stand the Heat, which again was another. What? And we'd just seen them at Reading. They'd done Reading Rock Festival, Reading '78, which was a great gig again. But then the album came out, and it was back. It was like, what? I really don't know what's going on. I'm at a loss. But do you know what the telling thing was? my mum came out of the kitchen and she said, "Oh, is that the new Quo album?" She said, "I like this." And in that moment, I just thought, it's all over.
Little did you know what was to come in many ways, and I think the last album I shall mention here before we wrap up is obviously Ain't Complaining, which celebrates its, well, depends what you think of it, but it turns 35 this year. What did you make of the late 80s in terms of Quo output?
I do recall, I mean, I'd sort of stopped during that period. I mean, Predator, Predator was sort of, that was our thing. So again, I'd kind of stopped listening intelligently to stuff. Because again, I was out doing my own thing. But again, the 80s for me were a write off anyway. It was like just about everybody that I'd enjoyed in the 70s. I don't know what had happened. They'd all gone into this 80s thing, which I didn't really go for at all. There's very few artists or bands that I like from the 80s. But to be fair, Ain't Complaining. I remember Baz playing it and listening to it, but it was an 80s album. And you see, the difference is that where the band were at that point, they'd written an 80s album. They'd produced an 80s album, which was appropriate to that period of time. So it was a conscious thing. See, the difference between me having a sort of adverse reaction to If You Can't Stand the Heat, Ain't Complaining didn't pretend to be anything else. So that, to me, kind of has my respect in that sense. You know, again, Francis finding all these melodies and things and stuff were just where you think at a particular point things could be exhausted. There he is again writing these songs and creating these hits. It's astonishing. But I don't listen to it. But if there's a Quo fan who says my first album was Ain't Complaining, and I love it, I would never disparagingly go, "Oh, you can't possibly be," you know, because that to that person is the same as when I got the Quo album. Whatever it is that they've made a connection with it, that's their one. So whatever your album is, whether it's Perfect Remedy or Thirsty Work or some of these other much maligned albums, if that's your first one and you've got a thing for it, and that was your introduction, and you've somehow found something there that's grabbed your attention, what's wrong with that? It's no, I salute you. You know.
Well, that seems like a great place to draw it to a close. When's the next gig for the Quo Connection? For Quo Connection, I'm going to get that right. Quo Connection. When's the next gig?
The next Quo Connection gig. Yeah, we've got another busy weekend coming up. We're playing in we've got Reading, so it's a home match. Well, certainly for me and Pete. Reading sub 89, and then we're in Sheffield the following day. Looking forward to that. Yorkshire, always great. There's just something about it's funny, isn't it? Where you go to different regions, the reactions that you get, they've all got their own personalities, and I love them all. It's that's the one thing that I do love about being in a band is meeting so many people from all over, whatever. And this thing that you do, this podcast thing, I have watched a few of them, and I've enjoyed them. And I do enjoy listening to other people and other people's perspectives on things. It's all very interesting, and there's been some really great ones. And Aidan, I particularly enjoyed Aidan's one. And that's another fantastic thing about the sort of Quo cover band scene, is there's such a variety of bands, and you're getting all the different flavors, and there's these young bands coming through as well. There's Heavy Traffic up in Scotland. You've got Aidan's Break the Rules. The Quo Experience, they're leaning more towards the sort of the current sort of Quo show thing. So if you want to see that show, they go and see them. So there's all these different people where people are at. If you want to see a particular approach, different approaches. There's some fabulous European bands as well, and there's all these different. It's all very interesting, There's something for everybody, which is great. Really good.
Yeah, as Rick used to say, it's a wide church.
It is indeed.
Yeah, well, with that, I say thank you, Mick, for appearing on the podcast today.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I've really enjoyed this. It's been great fun.